Good morning, everyone. Gosh, it's so great to be here. It feels like such an honor and really such a joy. Hi, all you Fillmore Festival people. Hello to those of you watching online today. It really does feel like a homecoming, so thank you so much for the honor and joy of being here. Well, about a year or so ago, I was standing out by my mailbox, and a woman came walking down the street with her granddaughter, and we stopped and said hello to each other. And then she asked me, "Is your husband a minister?" Well, this was before Richard was ordained. So I said, no, he's not a minister. And then she looked a little surprised, and she goes, she says, "I heard that a minister lives here." And I said, no, my husband isn't a minister. I am. That was not what she was expecting. And she was visibly surprised by it, and she said, "Oh, okay." And she asked the name of my church, and she said, maybe sometime she would come and visit, and then she kind of hurried off. But it was such a stark reminder that there are still denominations that do not allow female clergy. And in that moment, I felt so grateful for unity. Unity, this beautiful spiritual movement that was founded by a man and a woman, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, and that not only accepts but encourages women to be ministers. In unity from the get-go, from the very beginnings of it, it's had this beautiful balance of male and female energies and a partnership between the sexes. We could say that unity is an equal opportunity spiritual movement that offers empowerment to both genders. But really it goes way beyond that, doesn't it? Because unity honors and accepts all people of all backgrounds, all faiths, all beliefs, all ages, all ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, whatever your background might be, just like the song that Richard started us out with, all are welcome here. I like to think of it as inclusive Christianity. And I really think that's what Jesus had in mind, don't you? I think that's not only what he had in mind, but it's what he demonstrated in his own ministry. Because he made such a point out of reaching out to people who might have been considered to be the others, to the outcasts or the downtrodden. He did it intentionally. Kept an open and inclusive table. He would dine with people who were considered to be, not touchable. And he taught us to love thy neighbor, and he made it very clear that our neighbor meant everyone. And so this was really the spirit of his ministry. He was not at all interested in human hierarchy. He was interested in wholeness. And that wholeness meant not only integrating our spiritual and our human selves, but also integrating the male and female aspects of ourselves. Are you guys familiar with the Gospel of Thomas? Anybody familiar with that? Well, it's one of the Gnostic Gospels. It's one of the Gospels that is not included in the Bible canon. And in verse 22 of the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "When you make the two into one, and when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, and when you make male and female into a single one, only then shall you enter the kingdom of heaven." Well, that's a little tricky to figure out, isn't it? So what's he really saying here? What he's saying is that when what you do on the outside matches who you are on the inside, when what you are holding in the upper realm in your head is aligned with what is in your heart, and when you fully integrate the male and female aspects of yourself, that's when you experience the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven, as we know, is within. And so he's really saying that heaven is in our wholeness. And Jesus really showed us this through his own example, did he not? When you think about it, he showed us this beautiful integration, this union of the male and female aspects of ourselves. Because on the one hand, he showed tremendous strength and courage and power and will. And at the same time, he demonstrated so much love and compassion and tenderness and care. You know, he took courageous stands. He defied the authorities. He put his life on the line. But he also washed the feet of his disciples and gathered the little children to him. He fed the hungry and he healed the sick. He was really showing what this beautiful integration of both aspects of ourselves looks like. And so he sort of epitomized this balanced expression of the masculine and feminine in a man. But only recently have we become aware that he had a spiritual partner who fully expressed the masculine and feminine in the form of a woman. And her name was Miriam the Magdala, who we know as Mary Magdalene. For centuries, she was miscast as a prostitute. So if any of you are still thinking of her that way, it's time to let that go. Time to release that. In fact, the Catholic Church in 1969 officially rescinded that description of her and said that there had been a big mistake. And so what is now being recognized is that she was one of the foremost disciples of Jesus, that she was indeed a spiritual partner to him and one of the most prominent leaders in the early Christianity. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? Elaine Pagels, in her book, The Gnostic Gospels, she says, Jesus praises Mary Magdalene not only as a visionary, but as the apostle who excels above all the rest. She was known as the apostle of the apostles, which means the teacher of the teachers, the preeminent disciple of Christ's message. Jesus called her the woman who knew the all. And the Gnostics, who were these first century Christians who did not subscribe to Christian orthodoxy, they believed Mary Magdalene was a visionary and that she had received secret revelations from Jesus. And they honored her as the first witness to the resurrection. You may have never noticed this before, but all four of the canonical Gospels cite Mary Magdalene as the first one, and in some cases the only one to witness Jesus' resurrection. And the Gnostic Gospels portrayed her as the beloved companion of Jesus. So I have to wonder if this characterization of her, this understanding of her, informed Leonardo da Vinci when he painted in 1498 The Last Supper. So let's take a look at what that looked like. Can you see that? It's kind of fuzzy, isn't it? Can we dim the lights? Let the lights be dimmed. Well, in any event, I don't know how well you can see it. Let's go in for the next slide. Maybe you can see it a little bit better. So that is who is sitting at Jesus' right hand. That's Miriam. Thank you so much, you guys. I forgot to forewarn you about that. So that's her sitting right next to him. But look at this next slide in terms of the resistance that has arisen about that characterization. Right here, it says, that's John. That's not Mary. That's just a very long-haired guy trying to claim that title of beloved companion for John. Amazing, right? Then I found this other picture, this next slide, of what I think the Last Supper probably looked like. Isn't this sweet? You know, there are men and women gathered there together. And I think it really shows the egalitarian treatment and also the simplicity of that event. So, you know, it takes time for things to change, for people to begin to see things differently. There is a gospel, a Gnostic gospel called the Gospel of Mary. It was released in 1955. It was published. And it was based on 3rd century Greek and 5th century Egyptian fragments of these old manuscripts. And it really does portray Mary Magdalene as this wise and revered teacher, and it also reveals some of the contentious relationships she had with the other disciples, and particularly Peter. There's a little infighting going on here, a little jealousy. But unfortunately, a lot of that document, that Gospel of Mary that was published and is kind of widely known or considered to be the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, a lot of that was lost through history. So 9 out of the 19 pages of it are missing. Yeah, so it's pretty spotty. However, I'm here to tell you, there is a new Gospel of Mary Magdalene that has come to the forefront in the last several years that is complete and it's compelling. It's called the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, the complete Gospel of Mary Magdalene. It looks like this. It was published in 2010 in English. It was translated from the original Greek. And it's said to have been written by Mary Magdalene herself, based on her own experiences. It's the life and ministry of Jesus. The translator says it was written about 5 years after Jesus' death. And think about that for a minute. 5 years by someone who was actually there. Compare that to what we know about the canonical Gospels that were not written by eyewitnesses, and the earliest ones of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written like 30 or 40 years after Jesus' death. So this is a very different kind of document, and it's been kind of hidden away for all of these years. It's said that she wrote this when she went to Egypt after Jesus' death, and then took it with her to southern France, and there she began her own ministry. And about 1,000 years later, those teachings, the teachings really of Jesus that she had shared but had also added on to through her own understanding, that became the centerpiece for the Cathars. The Cathars were a Christian sect in southern France. And they took shape about in the 1100s or so. And for hundreds of years, they had this incredibly flourishing society, very much like what we envision in unity. You know, a world that works for all, people living together in peace and harmony, and it flourished economically. But these Cathars were non-traditional Christians. They didn't buy into the traditional church, and they did not offer their allegiance to the Pope. So that got them into trouble. So the Pope eventually joined forces with the French king, and they went in one of the bloodiest and most brutal crusades in history, and they completely obliterated the Cathars, completely wiped them out. But this document survived. Richard and I went to Cathar country in May. We actually traced the entire journey of Mary Magdalene and her ministry and where the Cathar castles were. It's very gripping to hear those stories and to witness sort of the magnitude of what occurred there. And so we don't know for sure that this beautiful book, the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, we don't know absolutely sure. We're not sure that it's authentic, but I will tell you this. It's compelling. It is stunning because there's a voice that comes through those writings. You know, even though some of the stories are very familiar, but this is an unredacted document, so it's never been edited. It doesn't have a lot of voices in there. It just has one simple and very clear voice. And so we read these stories that we've read in other Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas as well, the Gospel of John, the Gospel of Mary. But we read them with this new sort of freshness and clarity and authenticity. And some of the most beautiful passages in this gospel are those that are unique to it. So there is a full description wherein Mary Magdalene describes this vision that she received from Yeshua, from Jesus, describing the ascension into higher consciousness or highest consciousness, awakening. And it also is the only gospel that makes it clear that Jesus was married and that Mary Magdalene was his wife. And it further goes on to present him as bestowing very clearly authority to her. Authority telling the other disciples to look to her. And it says in here, I tell you this, when all have abandoned me, only she shall stand beside me like a tower. A tower built on a high hill and fortified cannot fall, nor can it be hidden. From this day forth, she shall be known as Magdala, for she shall be that's the Hebrew word for tower, for she shall be as a tower to my flock, and the time will soon come when her tower shall stand alone by mine. Well, that's a lot different than what we hear in traditional Christianity, isn't it? It's a lot different. You know, traditional Christianity has been pretty patriarchal, very much like the religion that Jesus protested in his own day. So this is a very big thing, this idea. But, it's becoming so clear that truly she was a powerhouse in her own right, that she was an enlightened and inspiring spiritual leader and his designated successor. Some of you may be familiar with Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan priest. I love his writings, kind of a mystic. And he writes that their partnership, the partnership between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, it went beyond equality. Mary Magdalene and Jesus took it a step further, including and transcending the opposites and birthing a new form of person who lived, ministered, and saw out of a new and non-dual consciousness. He says Mary Magdalene applied the teachings that Jesus showed her. She did her own inner work, and she emerged through the eye of the needle into singleness. If Jesus shows us what the completed human being looks like in male form, Mary Magdalene models it for us in its female version. Together they become the Christosophia, the androgynous archetype of human wholeness. Richard Rohr wrote that. I find this absolutely momentous and very intriguing, and I get particularly excited about it because, like I said, I've always appreciated that unity was founded by a man and a woman. It has this beautiful balance of energies in it, but just imagine now the impact if we're discovering that the original Christianity was pioneered and advanced by a man and a woman. That could completely upend Christianity as we have known it, if the word gets out. And the word is getting out. And the word is getting out. So the Gospel of the Beloved Companion is among the top 5% selling books on Amazon. It's been printed in multiple languages. People all over the world are reading it. And there's something about it. The translator has actually become a friend of ours and mine. And she says, let this work speak for itself. It has an energy, and that's what you experience when you read it, that there is this power and beauty in this single voice coming through that is really touching people. And it certainly has touched me. Up until I read this gospel, I had never really thought too much about the fact that all the spiritual masters that I look to and seek to emulate are men. Really, the big names, Jesus and Buddha and Dalai Lama and Gandhi and even Lao Tzu to some degree. I never really thought about that because I love their teachings. I know they're all applicable to women as well as men. But when I read this, something shifted. Something shifted. There was the sense of the feminine coming in so strongly and so pure and untainted. And it has moved me very deeply, in case you can't tell. This is a big deal for me. And it's a big deal for our congregation as well back there at Unity Renaissance. We've had the translator visit us 3 times. I'm going to teach a class on this gospel as part of our SEE week in September. We're going to offer it online as well, if you're interested in that kind of thing. But the Gospel of the Beloved Companion is one way in which the feminine is rising. The feminine is rising in our society, in our world. We certainly have noticed that there are a lot of women running for office now. Amen. And there are new social movements being, sort of springing up, and old injustices that were swept under the rug are coming up to be addressed. And I think even beyond that all of us are feeling called into our hearts. This is a tough time. I think all of us are perhaps feeling that need to kind of get in better balance of the feminine and the masculine here. And really feeling that need to come back to caring and to tenderness, to compassion and inclusion. So these are ways in which the feminine is rising. I know these are very difficult and tumultuous times, but listen here, folks. Don't be fooled by appearances. Because underneath all of this, the feminine is rising and consciousness is evolving. And I truly, deeply, in my heart, believe that from this most divided time will come the greatest and most powerful unity and oneness we have ever experienced. Can I get an amen to that? Hold that vision with me. In so many ways, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore set us up for these kind of challenging times, didn't they? And very much, as we're learning, was true for Jesus and Mary Magdalene. They encouraged a sense of wholeness. They showed us what balance looked like. They showed us what the full expression of masculine and feminine, because don't you believe it, that just Myrtle was the heart and Charles was the head. That's not true. She was brilliant, and he had an amazing heart. They were both whole people showing up as them. And so they taught us lessons about stepping into our own wholeness so that we can feel the kingdom of heaven. But even beyond that, realize that everything that they taught contributed to the evolution of human consciousness, just as everything that we are doing in unity is contributing to the evolution of human consciousness. So let's be mindful about that. Let's look at where we need to find greater balance in our own lives. And then let's go forward, following in their footsteps, so grateful for their legacy, and proud and inspired to carry on.